What is needed for success in war? The first answer to this question is soldiers and equipment, because the strength of armies is measured by the number of military personnel and equipment. But is this equation valid in all circumstances? Of course not. When we look at the developments in the Russia-Ukraine war in detail, it is clear that this equation is not consistent. Russia, which claims to have one of the most powerful armies in the world, cannot succeed against Ukraine. It is claimed that the Russian army has over 2 million soldiers, including reservists. In addition, the Russian army is said to have nuclear weapons and advanced equipment. But why is Russia failing despite all this? There are many reasons for the failure of the Russian army. The most important one is the inexperience of the soldiers in the army. Hundreds of thousands of inexperienced soldiers who did not want to fight and had never served on a front were assigned to invade Ukraine. These soldiers are doing more harm than good to the Russian army. The situation of the Ukrainian army is very different. Immediately after the unjust annexation of Crimea by the Russian occupiers, the Ukrainian army began rigorous training. Thanks to this training, every single soldier in the Ukrainian army has become a professional fighter. During the invasion of Ukraine launched by Putin last year, this situation was clearly revealed. It has become clear that success in war requires trained and experienced soldiers rather than large numbers. The operation carried out by Ukrainian troops the other day demonstrated this. The 36th Separate Marine Brigade of the Ukrainian Army blew up the invading tank platoon in the Donetsk region with a spectacular tactic and ambush as Anchor Taylor News Team. We continue to report the details of this operation carried out by the Ukrainian Army and all the developments in the Russia-Ukraine war. With our understanding of accurate and impartial journalism, you can click on the Super Thanks button to support our teammates and our work. Let's examine the details of the attack carried out by the Ukrainian 36th Separate Marine Brigade. The Ukrainian army recently carried out a successful operation in the Donetsk region. The tactics prepared before the operation were spectacular. The Ukrainian army cleared a road through an empty field for the Russian invaders to advance. This road was wide enough for a tank or a military vehicle to move in one direction. This was because the Russian army would not be able to retreat once the attack was launched. Russian troops used the road through the wasteland to attack Ukrainian troops, but Ukrainian soldiers were waiting in ambush. Ukrainian soldiers were waiting for Russian military vehicles to pass on the road they had dug. They were armed with Javelin missile systems. These missile systems had been added to the inventory of the Ukrainian army with the help of Western countries such as the UK and the USA. With the Javelin missile systems, the Ukrainian army had made great gains in many regions. Javelin missile systems are both ground-based and lightweight missile systems that can be carried and used on the shoulder. The armor of the missiles launched by this missile system is thin. For this reason, when it reaches the target, it explodes with more violence than expected. Javelin missiles are very effective in destroying tanks and armored vehicles. Ukrainian soldiers waiting in ambush with Javelin missiles prepared to fire when Russian invaders appeared in the area. But seeing that more than one tank would pass through the roads they dug, the soldiers decided to wait because sometimes waiting for an attack means being able to hit many more targets at the same time. Experienced Ukrainian soldiers knew this important information. One tank on the road soon became 5. The time was ripe for an attack. Ukrainian soldiers fired the first missile from a hill out of sight of the Russian invaders. The first missile successfully hit its target. The invading soldiers driving the Russian tanks were surprised. The tanks advancing one after the other thought of turning back. But they failed because the Ukrainian army had dug the road into one lane. Then the second missile was fired and the second Russian tank was blown up. The Ukrainian army was recording all the images of the attack with drone cameras. The third missile hit the target with a direct hit. In the photos of the attack shared on social media, it is seen that 3 occupying soldiers come out of tank hit by a Javelin missile. One of the invaders coming out of the flaming tank has difficulty walking. The other 2 soldiers are trying to escape from the area, but they do not realize that their every move is being watched by Ukrainian drones. In this operation, Ukraine's 36th Marine Separate Brigade blows up 5 Russian tanks one by one. The footage of the attack was watched by millions of people on social media. The 36th Marine Separate Brigade released the following statement about the footage. have the Javelin Fighters of the 36th Separate Brigade of Marines, named after Rear Admiral Mikhailo Bolensky, burned Russian armored vehicles in Donetsk region is a real art. There were two important elements that enabled the Ukrainian army to succeed in this offensive. The first is undoubtedly the professional soldiers. The footage shows soldiers firing Javelin missiles with ease and successfully hitting their targets with a single shot. The second important development that contributed to the success of this attack was the aid provided by Western countries to the Ukrainian army. In the coming days, many powerful military equipment and vehicles will be added to the Ukrainian army's inventory. Military aid from Western and European countries is of great importance in the Russian-Ukrainian war. Almost the entire world is providing military assistance to the Ukrainian army to stop the advance of the Russian invaders. Germany is one of them. In recent months, Germany announced that it would deliver 18 Leopard 2 tanks to the Ukrainian army. These tanks arrived in Ukraine this week. Poland, Norway, and Canada have also delivered the promised Leopard tanks. The Indian Army. Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov spoke about Type Kit. Reznikov said he hoped that Western countries would send at least 2 battalions of Leopard tanks by the end of April. In addition, he said that Ukrainian soldiers trained for the tanks sent by the US and France have completed their training. Ukrainian army continues to strengthen. It is said that the Ukrainian army, which is getting stronger day by day, is preparing for a major attack. Oleg Zadornov, a Ukrainian military analyst, made statements on this issue. According to Zadornov, the Ukrainian army will cross the corridor between Russia and Crimea and reach Melitopol and the Sea of Azov from Zaporizhia. Oleg Zadornov explained Ukraine's goal in this offensive as follows: it will split the Russian troops in two and cut the supply lines to the troops for the rest in the direction of Crimea. Ukraine continues to deal heavy blows to the Russian invaders with successful operations. The tide of the war seems to be turning against Putin. When do you think the Ukrainian army will launch its big offensive? What do you think about the tactics and ambushes of the Ukraine's 36th Marine Separate Brigade before the attack? Is the aid provided by Western countries to the Ukrainian army effective in the course of the war? The Russian military tried to attack the Ukrainian capital with kamikaze drones last night, but Ukraine's air defense unit successfully destroyed all Russian drones moving towards Kiev. This is the 6th airstrike on the capital since the beginning of May. This time, the Russian army only attacked with unmanned aerial vehicles. According to preliminary information, Iranian-made Shahid-type munitions moving in the direction of the capital's airspace were detected during the latest air raid alarm in Kiev, which lasted 2.5 hours. All Russian drones moving towards Kiev were successfully destroyed by the amazing capabilities of the Ukrainian air defense troops. Ukrainian officials said there were no reports of damage or injuries in the drone strike on Kiev. Thanks to modern air defense systems supplied by Ukraine's Western partners, Ukraine has begun to suffer little damage from Russian missile and kamikaze attacks, in particular with the US's agreement to supply the Patriot systems to Ukraine and the deployment of the systems to Ukraine. The Ukrainian airspace was completely closed to Russian aviation. Seeing the success of Ukraine, the United States is preparing to take new steps to improve Ukraine's air defense capabilities. So what will be the step of the USA? This week, U.S. officials announced a new aid package for Ukraine totaling $1.2 billion. The security aid package, in addition to previous shipments to Kiev, aims to strengthen the country's air defense. The package includes conventional artillery counter-drone munitions, financing for military training, and satellite imaging services. According to U.S. officials, the weapons and equipment in this package will be paid for by the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, USAI funding, which allows the U.S. to buy from industry rather than pull it from military stockpiles. This news coincides with a collaborative effort by the United States and other NATO allies to provide Ukraine with modern main battle tanks in the coming months. Kiev is preparing for the highly anticipated counteroffensive against Russian forces, and this aid package will undoubtedly support the defensive and offensive efforts of the Ukrainian army. The U.S. Department of Defense has committed its latest aid package to critical short-term capabilities such as air defense systems and munitions, as a demonstration of US's commitment to support Ukraine. It also justified this commitment by improving the capacity of the Ukrainian armed forces to defend its territory and to deter Russian aggression in the long run. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky eagerly accepted the package as a sign of solidarity with Ukraine, shown on Europe Day and the day of victory over Nazism in the Second World War. So what else does this aid package include? As part of the package, the US is also sending additional ammunition to Ukraine for the M777 155mm howitzer. This weapon has become one of the most demanded systems in Kiev since the beginning of the war. The M777 light 155mm howitzer provides direct reinforcement and artillery support to forces. An exploding detonator, propellant, projectile, and fuel form the structure of very large projectiles. Each bullet weighs roughly 100 pounds and can be fired in howitzer systems. Half-cannon, half-motor M777 weighs around 10,000 pounds and has a maximum range of 15 to 20 miles. While this machine may seem heavy, the heavy use of titanium in all its major builds makes the M777 7,000 pounds lighter than its predecessor without sacrificing range, stability, accuracy, or mobility. According to experts, the M777 independent suspension, smaller footprint, and lower profile increase strategic deployment capability and tactical mobility. 155mm shells are very popular with the Ukrainian soldiers, as they are large enough to deal sufficient damage to targets while maintaining a solid range. Last year, the Pentagon announced that it had supplied Ukraine with more than 1.5 million 155mm shells and more than 160 155mm howitzers. Well, are these guns only sent by the USA? The United States is not the only country supplying these weapons and ammunition to Kiev. Germany, Canada, Estonia, and Italy are among the other countries that have sent this equipment to support Ukraine. While the final aid package should not include the M777 in U.S. stockpiles, some experts believe the U.S. is running low on these formidable weapons. According to experts, the number of M777 howitzers in its inventory is limited as the U.S. Army supplies only 425 of these in total. Considering the air and naval capabilities of the U.S. Army, the supply of these howitzers from Army inventory or mass production to Ukraine does not mean the loss of power for the U.S. Army. On the contrary, the more these howitzers are sent to the Ukrainian Army, the more Ukraine's war effort will be increased. The Russian Army, which suffered heavy losses against the Ukrainian Army, gave most of these losses against HIMARS in 155mm howitzers. The effective use of these advanced weapons at the front by the Ukrainian Army, which has a natural artillery capability, put the Russian Army in a dead end in terms of personnel loss as the duration of the war increased. So what is the Russian Army doing to save itself from this impasse? The Russian Army began recruiting convicts from Russia's large penal colonies to compensate for heavy losses in Ukraine. Russian forces prepare for the upcoming Ukrainian counteroffensive. Kiev stated that the attack will take place in late May or early June. The exact time and place remains a mystery. Although Ukrainian forces have stepped up their attacks on Russian logistics lines in the south of the country. In addition, Russian forces continue to suffer significant losses on land. Russia has lost about 198,000 soldiers in Ukraine since the beginning of the war. In general, the Ukrainian army has 3,750 main battle tanks of the Russian army, 7,300 armored combat vehicles, 3,100 artillery systems, 560 multiple rocket launchers, 243 air defense systems, 310 warplanes, 300 helicopters, 2014 operational and tactical level unmanned aerial vehicles, 1,000 cruise missiles destroyed, 18 warships cutter, 6,000 trucks and tankers, and 400 special equipment. As a result of these losses, Russian forces are experiencing serious force-building problems. The high casualty count deters new volunteers, and the Kremlin is wary of throwing conscripts into Ukraine's meat grinder to maintain public support for the war. For months, the Russian Ministry of Defense had successfully handed over the war to the private military company Wagner Group. Wagner Group mercenaries captured important parts of the battlefield, such as Bakhmut, and made progress. Today, Russian forces control a large part of the town in Donbass, but have not succeeded in taking it completely. But internal disagreements between the Russian army and the Wagner Group broke the agreement, and now the Russian army is looking for men to fight on the front lines. So where will Russia get the soldiers it needs? Since the beginning of 2023, the Russian Ministry of Defense has stepped up its plan to recruit Russian prisoners. The choice for human beings is between bondage and freedom. As we all know, the Ukraine war has put two roads in front of people. One of these ways is bondage and the other is freedom. It was quite clear which path the Ukrainian people would choose. So what would the citizens of other countries whose fire of freedom was burning in them? Do we get the answer to this question from the citizens of many countries, especially the Belarusian fighters? The inclusion of Belarusian senior commanders in the Ukrainian army was becoming a major problem for both Putin and Lukashenko. We will reveal the situation and aims of the Belarusian fighters fighting in the Ukrainian army in striking detail on February 27, 2022, just 2 days after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky called on friends of Ukraine freedom and democracy to volunteer for the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Forces. In his call, Zelensky framed the Russian invasion as a struggle between the global rules-based order and authoritarianism, a struggle against Russian war criminals. Just 2 weeks after Zelensky asked foreigners to serve in the Ukrainian International Legion, Ukraine announced the arrival of more than 20,000 foreign volunteers from 52 different countries. The most striking detail among these volunteers were the Belarusian Warriors. So why are Belarusian fighters on Ukrainian soil? And what are the main goals of these warriors? Let's explore these questions together. The volunteer battalion of Belarusian fighters fought alongside the Ukrainian army in frontline hotspots from the defense of Kiev to battles in eastern Ukraine, especially in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk in the south. In Mykolaiv, the Volit battalion was quite active on the front line. This battalion is fighting for a future in the Belarusian regiment in Ukraine, continues its claim to democracy. Belarusian soldiers see the Ukrainian war as a chance to hone their combat skills and eventually bring the war to Belarus. The Belarusian battalion in the Ukrainian army consists of elite fighters, especially in Belarusian and even Soviet armies. There are also warriors who are in the ranks of senior commander or general. This is a situation that the Lukashenko administration fears. It is a great gain for Ukraine that senior commanders from Belarus also join the Ukrainian army. For Belarusian libertarians, only a violent revolution can save their country from the clutches of its dictatorial leader, Alexander Lukashenko. On the other hand, of the various groups of foreign fighters currently serving on the Ukrainian side in its war against Russian aggression, perhaps Belarusians will benefit most from a victory over Vladimir Putin's forces. Thousands of Belarusians left the country in political exile after peaceful protests failed to overthrow the regime of the Kremlin. Closer Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko after the controversial elections in 2020. Since then, at least hundreds of Belarusians have joined the ranks of Ukraine's International Legion. Belarusian soldiers here say that they have acquired the necessary skills to implement regime change in their own country. Oscar, a current member of the volunteer unit, made some remarks at the opening of a museum exhibit dedicated to Belarusian volunteers fighting in Lviv, Ukraine. Oscar stated that they have more experience in real warfare than most Belarusian officers. Oscar stated that he was genuinely afraid of what the Lukashenko regime might do next time there was a political crisis in the country. Also, Oscar worked as a cook in the Kiev region for more than a year, although he had no military experience. On February 25, 2022, the second day of the total invasion of Russia, he and a few of his friends voluntarily went to a military office to learn how to get to the front. But eventually they found a way to war by becoming members of the Kastysko-Lanovsky Regiment, an all-Belarusian unit in Ukraine's International Legion. Zanis, who fled Belarus, said that after Ukraine's victory, Lukashenko should be tried as a war criminal. Along with Putin, Lukashenko did not just oppress his own people, he also allowed the Russian aggressors to use his territory as a launching point towards Russia, and he must take responsibility for this. On the other hand, it's not only the opposition-minded youth of Belarus who have embraced the Ukrainian cause. Among them was a tall, broad-shouldered young woman nicknamed Dasha, also dressed in camouflage, whose specialty on the front line was the use of rocket-propelled grenade launchers. Dasha said that Russia stole my house, and now it was even trying to steal my neighbor's house, and I had to do everything I could to prevent them from succeeding. It is possible to draw only one conclusion from the statements made by the Belarusian fighters. Belarusian fighters know that they can't get rid of Lukashenko without getting rid of Putin. For this reason, the primary goal of the soldiers in the Volat battalion is to liberate Ukraine. Then the Belarusian fighters plan to liberate their own country from Lukashenko. The successes of these fighters on the Ukrainian front lines also draw the attention of Russia. A senior Russian official warns that Belarusians fighting on the side of Ukraine against Russia may try to overthrow their own government. A senior Russian official's warning came the same week as Putin announced that Moscow would build storage facilities for tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus and trained Belarusian pilots to deliver warheads from its own Su-24 aircraft. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Galuzin explained to the Georgian television network RTV that the rhetoric of Belarusian nationalist formations fighting in the Donbas region as part of the Ukrainian armed forces has hardened significantly. Galuzin said that the leaders and commanders of these brutal mercenaries make it clear that in the future they plan to use their experience to forcibly overthrow the current Belarusian leadership. Galuzin told Belarusian law enforcement agencies supported by the Regional Forces Group that they should consider such risks. In addition, Galuzin begged the Regional Forces Group to repulse the attack on Belarusian territory if necessary. Galuzin referred to the deepening relations between the countries and stated that the Russians will stand shoulder to shoulder with their brothers to protect the sovereignty and security of the Union state. In another development, Lukashenko threatened the UK over its plan to supply depleted uranium-containing ammunition to Ukraine. The Belarusian leader said that if the UK sends ammunition, Russia will give real uranium ammunition to Belarus. The fact that Belarus is making threats to the UK and openly voicing its support for Putin raises a question mark in mind. Will Belarus join Russia's invasion of Ukraine? We'd be glad if you let us know your thoughts in the comments. Since Vladimir Putin's special military operation in Ukraine began a year ago, there has been much discussion about the possibility of Belarus to ally with Russia and thus create another front for the daredevil, but besieged Ukrainian defenders. After all, Alexander Lukashenko, who has been the only president in Belarus's entire history as an independent nation, is known for being buddies with Putin. In addition, Putin persuaded Lukashenko to surrender most of Belarus to his army, and Belarusian military bases and airports became the exclusive headquarters of Russian troops fighting in Ukraine. It is believed that these places were also used to treat wounded Russian soldiers. Looking at the relations between Belarus and Russia, it is not possible for us to give a clear answer as to whether Belarus will participate in the Ukraine war or not. But one of the distant goals of the Volat battalion is to prevent this possibility. Finally, Belarusian fighters took part in anti-regime protests in their own country. As a result, many Belarusians face severe criminal sanctions. The Belarusian warriors who faced all difficulties found their own way again. The fire of freedom burning in them brought the Belarusian fighters to the territory of Ukraine. It seems that the liberation of Ukraine from the Russian occupation will be a preliminary process for the liberation of Belarus. A person could choose his attitude his own way in any situation he faced. This freedom was the only freedom that could not be taken from man.